And you are live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third season of the Trauma Research Foundation Book Club. We're really excited to welcome you here today. And as we get started, we'll do some introductions and tell you a little about this program and our foundation and what to expect for the next couple of weeks together. So I'm Teresa Young. I'm the Director of Operations here with TRF, and perhaps feel free to go ahead and take a look at the right and use the chat box and let us know where you are from or perhaps how you're feeling for this session. And then a quick note is that if you aren't able to comment, you find yourself that you're not able to access the chat function, be sure that you're subscribed to our channel in order to do so. So a little bit about TRF. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is that we're dedicated to supporting and growing a community of clinicians, researchers, educators, and people whose lives are affected by trauma. In today's session, our first episode of this 4-part series, each week we're bringing together as many as 15 panelists to discuss this book, The Master Plan, My Journey from Life in Prison to a Life of Purpose by Chris Wilson and Bret Witter. During the final episode on Thursday, September 29th, here's the schedule. The author, Chris Wilson, will actually be joining our conversation for a live Q&A. So we do hope that you'll be joining us each week for these live discussions, and then for sure join us in this last week with Chris. We are really excited to invite our virtual community to participate in discussion with us as always, and there are 2 ways that you can do that. The first is by using that chat function in YouTube, as I had pointed out earlier. Just engage with everyone. Our TRF team is actually in there with you. And what we always do is we love to track the discussion points that are going on, comments, and then at the intermittently throughout the session, we'll share some of the comments from you all from the virtual community. Secondly, we are very open to welcoming all sorts of people from around the world, age, occupation to come and join us as a panelist. There aren't any requirements to be a panelist. And so if you would like to join us as a panelist, you can actually find the panelist application link on our website, and we'll also drop it in the chat for you as well. So to know a little bit more about our panelists who are with us today, some of them will continue on throughout the season, some of them will just be in one episode or another. So if you want to know a little bit about them, as they share, we'll be sharing a bit of their bio in the chat so you can get to know who's sharing with you today. I'd also just like to acknowledge and welcome and introduce the TRF team that is continuously working to make these wonderful programs accessible to our community. So we have Laura Walsh, who's our programs manager. We have Stephanie Kimball, who's leading this program. We have Pat Murray, who's our media manager. And we have Abigail Bueno, who is in all sorts of ways supporting us across customer service. So now I would like to introduce to you our moderator, Frederick Mann, who actually started with us all the way in season 1 as a panelist and has continued with us through the seasons and is now joining us as a moderator. So thank you so much, Frederick, for being with us. Something we really prize in our community is the ability to work with people across many different aspects and avenues of the organization. So Frederick, over 20 years, has worked with diverse populations and professions directly and indirectly as a teacher, administrator, consultant, and researcher. He has worked as a clinical referral coordinator and trainer at the Child Trauma Training Center in the Department of Psychiatry at UMass Chan Medical School. There, he's provided assistance and referral support for families, clinicians, educators, and other professionals throughout the state of Massachusetts. He's also trained and facilitated workshops in how to understand trauma, identify trauma triggers and responses, and effectively support and aid children who have experienced trauma. Other roles he's had is as an outpatient clinician and school liaison for a community mental health agency and family resource center. He's also worked directly with families and children impacted by impaired caregivers due to drug addictions, mental illness, incarceration, immigration, barriers, and violence. Frederick facilitated group, individual, couple, sibling, and family therapy sessions based on clinical needs, and has also led parent trainings and father support groups, specialized workshops for special needs, disabled children, and designed, implemented short-term therapy and coaching support sessions for court-involved youth. Wow. Thank you, Frederick, and all of the experiences that you are bringing forward to us today. I'll share with you a little bit about myself. I'm based in Northern California, and I generally just have a passion for building programs and teams and organizations to create communities and healing around trauma. My own work is inspired by my own experiences in trauma. I had founded a nonprofit called the Trauma Project a couple years ago, which is what work led me to finding the TRF team. And since then, I've just been loving working with this remarkable and inspiring team. So from there, I guess we're ready to dive into our first question. Audience, what you can expect is we'll have a series of most likely 7 questions and welcoming the panelists to share with them their reflection. Part 1, just to share some salient points. Also, if you haven't received this, we do have a study guide that goes along with this book. It's been made by another woman in our community named Amanda Priest. And so go ahead and find that. It's a free download. And this is one of the sections you'll find. 3 salient points for part 1. Chris spent, my screen is just blocked. Chris spent much of his childhood living in the neighborhood of Lincoln Heights and was witness to significant community violence. Second point, Chris discovered his passion for reading as a young child and often went to the library to escape the tension on the streets. And thirdly, Chris struggled in school because he experienced significant anxiety and difficulty sleeping due to the violence in his neighborhood. Frederick, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here, and I can't wait to hear the voices. How does living in a neighborhood that experiences significant community violence impact an individual's ability to be successful? So we're going to think about that. We look forward. Please raise your hand if you would like to answer. I'm not able to see the participant. Let me see. So who would like to answer this? How does living in a neighborhood that experiences significant community violence impact an individual's ability to be successful? What do you think?
We have Amanda raising her hand.
Lisa's on. Lisa's up on screen there. Can you not see Lisa there?
Oh, now I can see her. Lisa, please share. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. What a pleasure to be here. First of all, thank you so much. This has really been quite a journey, intriguing as we've taken a look at this book. But specifically regarding that question, my first response was, there's nothing that it wouldn't touch. I mean, it touches the entire universe of any person, whether you're talking about their family, whether you're talking about their neighborhood, their school, their community, their church. It's universal in every area, every aspect of their life, their development, their perspective, what they see, how they see it, how they view it, and how they respond to their world. So I just see that this is all, it encompasses everything.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate your contribution. Thank you. Let's go to Amanda.
I think a lot of success hinders on the ability to focus and to feel safe. And when you're in a community that should feel unity, but there's violence and stress. The distractions, Chris experiences that where he's frequently sleep deprived or has insomnia because you're always hyper vigilant about what's happening around you, and without sleep and without the ability to focus, it's really hard to put your priorities into things that lead to success, as opposed to keeping yourself safe from harm and your mind focused on that instead of the practices that allow us to be successful.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much. James, how about you?
Yeah, I think peer pressure has a lot to do with it, and particularly being introduced to violent behavior. Violent behavior is learned behavior. Something that we have worked with incarcerated men has been what we call male role belief system, which a person grows up with, a male grows up with, and from peer pressure, family and community, they start to follow a track of, well, this is how it is to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
And if I need to be violent to take care of my needs, then violence is learned in this way.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, I'm amazed. All three of you contributed such significant insights around it. It is truly pervasive in your whole life, and it impacts your worldview around what does it mean to be a person or a man, and also it emotionally how it creates all the turmoil as you have said. So that is great. We're gonna jump to the next question, but this is so beautiful to hear how to really understand how this is so impactful when you experience this and how it changes a person's way that they engage in the world. Yes.
I think we actually have time for maybe one or two more thoughts on this question if people are
Okay.
have something to share. Dr. Caryetta?
Yes, one thing that just in treating people, I also understand that this type of violence, depending on kind of like the nature versus nurture
Mhm.
concept, that we can also have individuals that can become hyperachievers, that they use this as a catalyst to say, I have to live a certain level of perfection,
Mm.
so I don't become like. So the drive is not just being successful alone. Yes, they can achieve that, but also this pseudo, I have to be everything but. And that's what I've seen as well, individuals that come out of a community of violence. I heard someone say, I got into this because of things that happened to me. So it begins to create a ground of nurturing, if you will, where I push myself beyond my struggle. And I then determine that I'm going to be better than the ground that I came out of.
I love how to be able to see the other impact of this, how it, as you just described, it allows you to see that this perfectionism or this ability to be more extraordinary than normal in terms of just it drives to succeed because of the impact of that reality of what happened or what was happening. That's a great contribution as well. Thank you. So how about anybody else, or should we go on to question 2? Oh, okay, we have someone. Dorian?
Yeah, So just heads up, I'm coming from a music therapy perspective, so a lot of my examples are going to be associated around music. But um, so I do music therapy at Rikers Island, and one of the things that we see so often with the folks that we're serving is that it's not that violence necessarily. It's not a decision. Like, it's not once you're born into violence, then therefore you are into violence. But it's creating an atmosphere in which you're much more susceptible to violence. So we always talk about how, what is the purpose of violence, and it's oftentimes a tool to gain power, or a tool to gain authority or respect. Um, and yeah, so it's just the reason I gave the precursor of the music therapy element is there's a song that we utilize by Immortal Technique, which is called Dancing with the Devil. It's about a young man who grows up in a very similar situation as Chris. And the first verse, it's about really about developing street cred and developing these relational spaces. But by the time it gets to the third verse, he is committed to doing a particular act, and the amount of regret that he feels moments after the act is done. And but he's now made a deal with the devil. That's kind of the way they present it in the song. But it just it means people are more susceptible to facing things in a really dark and malicious way. So yeah.
Yeah. And what I hear everyone saying, that it can there could be a barrier, there could be barriers, additional barriers placed in people's lives that will create a challenge. And it could be, with those barriers, some people are able to propel themselves or push forward and do things. But the most important, there is this additional challenge in addition to just regular life and development. And what does it mean when someone also has these additional burdens or barriers to overcome, in addition to just the normal development stages and challenges in life? So thank you, everyone. Great contribution. Teresa.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, what a great kickoff to the discussion. And just wanted to share that there are a couple of people in the YouTube chat stream who are really excited to be connecting with James Fox. And so thought I'd take a moment to introduce James, who is the founder of the Prison Yoga Project, and also has been working with us, and we'll have someone present in all of our sessions. So a little bit to share about James. He's a certified yoga instructor who's dedicated himself to developing a trauma-informed approach to teaching yoga in correctional facilities. And that work has actually resulted in the establishment of yoga programs in prisons throughout the US, Mexico, Europe, and Australia. And as a practitioner of yoga and mindfulness for more than 30 years, upon receiving his credentials in 2000, James basically began this mission of sharing the benefits of yoga with incarcerated populations. He has taught yoga classes at San Quentin Prison since 2002. He's also trained in restorative justice principles and practices, and has experience facilitating victim offender education, emotional literacy, and violence prevention courses with prisoners. You can read his work. He's an author of the book Yoga, A Path for Healing and Recovery, and also co-author of the book Freedom from the Inside, a woman's yoga practice guide. He's also contributed to the book Best Yoga Practices for Veterans. James serves on the faculty for the Loyola Marymount University in LA Yoga, Mindfulness, and Social Change program, and is an advisor to the NIH-sponsored Chicago Urban Mindfulness Program. Some additional impressive credentials is that he's been awarded the U.S. State Department grants to advise and train governmental and non-governmental personnel in Central America involved in prisoner and ex-gang member rehabilitation programs. And he was also in 2015 honored by Yoga Journal magazine with the Karma Yoga Award. And in addition, Bill Brown, who is here with us, is the executive director of Prison Yoga Project. And a little bit about Bill is that through his work with PYP, he really hopes to promote social change. He really hopes to transform our systems and culture to create a much more inclusive, equitable, and just world. Bill actually began working with PYP in 2013 and has served in federal, state, and county facilities. And it was in 2016 where he began offering training with PYP in trauma-informed yoga for incarcerated people, and then assumed the executive director role in 2018. He's also a contributing editor to the Yoga Service Council / Omega Institute's book, Best Practices for Yoga and Criminal Justice System. And a little bit more about him is that in his downtime, he enjoys the creative outlets of photography and cooking and is an avid reader of science fiction. So if you have anything you want to drop in the notes to both James and Bill, I mean, just thank you both so much for the work that you bring to the world. And I can't imagine the path that it's been to get to where it is today, but hopefully we can have some time to hear from both of you in that journey later today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go on to question 2, which is, what strengths does Chris demonstrate as a young child living in a cave? So again, what strengths does Chris demonstrate as a young child living in a cave? Karen, let's hear from you.
I think a better question is, what strengths did he not exhibit? Because he's clearly a remarkable young man. Even as a child, you could tell that he had a drive in him. You know, he wanted better and he cared about his relationships. You could see the care he had for his mom and his family, his grandparents, his siblings. He's resilient is not a good word for him. He's way above and beyond resilient. It's, going through the first few, chapters or the pages, like every single page, there was a trauma that he was going through as such a young little boy. I identified with him a little bit. I know a white female can't really relate well to a Black man, but I grew up in a very dysfunctional, abusive home. So I never felt safe at home, but I felt safe in my community. I felt safe at my school, and he didn't have those places of safety. So to me, Chris was beyond remarkable. His strengths are more than I could, adequately explain. He's just amazing.
Thank you for that, Karen. Yeah, that was one biggest thing that came in my mind too, is just the relationships, the importance setting, let's just say, of how he grew up and what was happening, but the underlying care and love and building in those relationships was just astounding. So, and it's really also beautiful to see how that continues with him throughout his life. So thank you for calling that out. Sabrina.
Well, I was struck by his curiosity as a child. The children that I've worked with that have been in violent environments, their curiosity declines. And they tend to create a bubble that they live in, and that becomes a boundary for their curiosity. And he had curiosity about what's it like outside of where he's living. And he even mentioned that in the book. He had thoughts about what's life like elsewhere. And I think that curiosity stayed with him, like his curiosity around going for his GED based on his interaction with the young man that was another lifer who was constantly studying. So I think that curiosity is so important, because I see so many adults and children who have suffered and their curiosity declines and becomes withdrawn. And matched with that curiosity was a sense of self-agency. Even as a young child making the decision as a child to go to the library to create an environment for himself where he felt safe and could actually do something that was generative shows a tremendous amount of self-agency and also awareness. I was really struck by how aware he was of his environment, and how able he was to translate what he was seeing into impact on others, empathy, and also impact on himself. And so I thought that was very remarkable. And I really enjoyed him being transparent and sort of blunt about the way that he saw people around him. And that's something that I enjoyed reading, his getting it from the way that he really felt about it and really saw it. Because of course I can't understand his experience. I'm a white woman. So that's important to me to see and feel it from his perspective.
Yeah, thank you. You listed a number of really amazing traits in there, from curiosity to self-reflection to agency, all really amazing strengths. And something I also heard kind of in between the lines there was discernment, through all of the reflection and the awareness, but then taking, all of that's coming into him from his experiences and relationships, and then turning that into discernible actions and results that then continued, with him, was really wonderful to follow. Thank you, Sabrina. Amanda.
I think something I could relate to a lot was what we draw, the strengths that we draw because of the distractions. So the hypervigilance is something that I'm, keenly aware of. And for Chris, it's seeing the strength in his grandparents, it's seeing the strengths that he admired in his mom, that would even as they were leaving him and leaving the neighborhood and leaving his mom, and she was going further and further into her own trauma reaction, he knew he did not want to pursue those paths. So in the midst of his cave, he maintained that sense of adventure that his mom brought to her or to him. He maintained the loyalty to his family. He maintained the loyalty to even the harshness of his grandfather, and was drawing all of those strengths in the midst of the chaos and the trauma and the distractions. And it takes somebody who has a sense of self, I think, to continue to draw from those things, especially at such a young age, and maintain that sense of, like what you were saying, discernment and the right and the wrong in the midst of the chaos of everything surrounding his world.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I'll just take a moment to share some thoughts from our virtual audience. So Sonia Brown has said, I read Chris Wilson's book avidly within a few days, and his determination, despite all of his experience, has been beyond awe-inspiring. Thanks, Chris, for sharing your vulnerable story. And yeah, James Wallace also echoing, curiosity is vital. It makes way with greatest feeling, velocitizing change of unleashing into better self. No question. Well put. Great. On to our next question, Frederick.
So our next question, I wanted to, is question 3. I want to let you know this question really struck me, and also just Chris's narrative around this was just insightful and challenging, but I'm curious of how how you have experienced this. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Discuss factors that prevent women from being able to leave an abuser, in particular when the abuser is in position of power, such as a police officer. Discuss factors that prevent women from being able to leave an abuser, in particular when the abuser is in a position of power, such as a police officer. Kieran, please share with us.
This question is incredibly powerful. I can't fathom, the police in our society are meant to protect and serve our communities and to not feel safe around them. I know it's experienced for a lot of African American males and other minorities, but to read about, it wasn't just police community, violence. It's like in your house, it was very powerful. So I think going back to the factors on why women may not be able to leave, especially if their partner is a person of authority, is they feel like they have no one to turn to, that no one is going to believe them or take them seriously. I've worked with women who've had military husbands, high ranking, with that same situation, because commands do the investigation for domestic violence on bases. And so they would have that experience as well. It would really take a lot of support and therapy and a really long time before they would be ready to accept help. So when people are in a position of power, especially in the home, it's really hard to relate to that, how trapped she felt. And also she was dependent on substances at that point too. So her judgment was even more impaired. I think finances as well. The officer was probably the main breadwinner for the family. So, and then like he controlled and abused the whole household, physically, emotionally, and then there was the sexual assault that we read about. So this man did a lot of damage in the family. And I don't know what chapter we go up to in this session, because I, like many of you, have read ahead. It's such a page turner, and it's very unfortunate that he and his mom didn't have a safe place to turn to.
Right. It was so just fascinating how he explained the web of barriers that the mom had encountered, even when she was when she was able to fight against the initial attack, but how just her vulnerability throughout, and how the struggles that she had to encounter. It was so just hard and challenging to read it and to experience it. It, as you just described, it was even just thinking about the series of challenges and difficulty that the mom had to experience, but also Chris had to witness as well. It was really heavy. How about others? Thank you, Karen, for your sharing. Nadia?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all the work you do. I had the honor of being the executive director of the Alameda County Family Justice Center in the Bay Area, that is in the heart of Oakland, and co-located the Oakland Special Victims Unit with the lead advocating nonprofits that help the victims, and a variety of other services. And that model was created specifically after a series of interviews directly from a perspective of somebody like Chris's mom. And it was heart-wrenching to read those parts of the book, because when she was, I'm not sure if she's still alive, but the will in her and how much she overcame with her studies and where she was just shining in her element from that point to then be in this dyadic abusive relationship that just infiltrated every single part of her, that put the blame on her and made it more dangerous for her in her mental state. She believed it would be more dangerous, I believe, to leave. And so the co-location of services is hoping to minimize, or I'm sorry, grasp those little tiny moments of light when there is that urge and that will to just flee and leave, especially when there's a powerful partner. Often the victims, you don't know where to start. She couldn't go to the police. She couldn't go, it'd be overwhelming. And if you do reach out for help, if she, had an inkling, what I saw was just utter exhaustion and defeat and an inability to really know where to begin. And so I just wanted to point out that there's models that are seeking to understand the perspective of these challenges and trying to get out and trying to change the delivery of these of help, to understand how overwhelming it can be to know where to begin. And so I believe she was overwhelmed. I believe she had power exerted over her in a multitude of levels, and just did the best she could every single day to try and keep herself and her children alive.
Right. And I think, as you just share that, I think that is one of the things that I took, that she did everything she could to keep herself and her children alive, because many do know that in some situations, when people are able to leave and escape, they also put their life and their children's life in jeopardy because of the power dynamic of how then the abuser chooses to take the people's lives as a power move, from my understanding. Dr. Walker, please jump in. We have several great hands in here. I'm excited. So please, we're gonna pull you in and shortly.
Yes, sir. Yes, this is amazing. One, because I looked at how Mr. Wilson's mom started. She started out working. She started out having things, purchasing a home, I believe, at 19 years old. She even taught him how to start a business, how to save money. It was against the stereotypical perspectives of how she ended up in an abusive situation, because she lived with her mother and her father. And there were so many dynamics in this writing that was absolutely amazing, because honestly, it reminded me in different aspects of the relationship I saw between my mother and father. And my mother came from, she would like to tell the story that they farmed, but they ate steak every day, and she doesn't eat steak to this day. I'm like, okay, so that's not poverty, Mom. That's not poverty. But the reality is, he created this cop. Mom at this time was a paramedic, if we remember the reading. So we're not looking at a struggling environment to that degree. He used her car. So it was literally a disrobing of her self-esteem, of what she had achieved. It was a total disabling and almost a disassembling who she was as a strong Black woman at that time. And then she was left to defend. And my question became, so how do we get to this place that we come in with everything and we walk out with nothing? And that was when I was really challenged. And I even asked my mother when I was like in my 30s, and I said, I just want to know, why did you stay? And her motive was, in her mind at that time, because, I didn't want, it was, 4 of us at that time. She said, I didn't want to see you guys struggle. So the surface of meeting need superseded the psychological need that we had that was being torn apart. But as I've aged, I don't know about your family, as you age, then you get the truth. That was the truth at 30. But as I've aged and my mother is almost 80 now, she tells a different version. She tells a version that my grandfather, who was a well-established man and they did not struggle, never wanted her to marry my father. So then I had a different perspective from this book. We're also looking at not wanting to return because we recognize now we're coming back with shame. So we end up tolerating and enduring, not because we don't have help in every situation. Sometimes pride, don't know people's faith. There's a scripture that talks about pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And it's not to blame, but it's so for us to see another view of sometimes help is available, but I don't necessarily like what help is going to look like, what help is going to sound like. So I had a lot of different views. Hopefully that added a different perspective sometime until we hear the other side of the story. I think we miss key parts, because if I would have just personally ran with the story at 30 and never came back to the story when she's almost 80, I would have left thinking something totally different. And I've seen women murdered, well, heard of, I don't want to say personally seen, where women had everything and they went knowingly into a relationship with men that had nothing,
Right.
except a title, if you will.
Right.
And they lost themselves.
Mm.
So I'm pretty sure my time is up.
Yeah. But I want to say, I what is really critical is the complexity and the nuance of
Mhm.
what you of this. When someone is a victim, when someone is terrorized, there's such great complexity and the impact, how trauma can impact someone's mind, their ability, their clarity. It is so much more complicated than just do this and that. It is so much more overwhelming, and it's so much more impactful. I
Mhm.
really think you really capture that. I know that we have several people. Teresa, I'm not for sure how we're on time. Are we able to take, or should we hold off? I just want to do a time check. But
Yeah, we do have to move on, but I do hope that the next question is equally as enticing and welcomes people's thoughts on. So
thank
um,
you.
definitely hold those thoughts, or be sure you can feel free to drop them in our Zoom chat here, and we can also share them with the virtual audience. Speaking of our virtual audience, just want to share some thoughts that have been coming from them, because they are very thoughtful and appreciated. So from Pearl, she says, in a violent community, the perception of authorities is that the community is underprotected but over-policed. So there is no help or support from those who are duty-bound to be agents of safety.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really, that feels on point and showcased in Chris's story. And Mitch says, thank you for speaking about this issue. These are very complex issues. I used to work with people who came out of the correctional system in the community mental health field, and I fully understand. And he also added, the LA County Department of Mental Health is completely overwhelmed from my past experience, not enough providers. Thank you, Mitch. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next question, which is question number 4. How might we better help children understand post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly for those living with caregivers that experience PTSD? So again, how might we better help children understand post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly for those living with caregivers that experience PTSD? Really great question. All right, we have a number of hands up. I think I saw Dorian come up first. So thank you, Dorian, for sharing.
Yeah, it's, music is a great way to communicate with youth who are affected by violence and who are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. We had an incident where we were working with a gentleman who's involved with the Crips, and very much like when we first met him, like, nah, I don't feel nothing, like I don't regret nothing, like just all that kind of stuff that people do when they put a front up. And one thing that we've learned, and this is kind of a way it's a joking way sort of, but it's like, we're working with somebody who's an intellectual genius but has the emotional health of maybe like a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old. And so music therapy is actually a very, very effective way, because I'll just give the example of the gentleman I was just speaking about. But he presented himself with us as just a very hardline person, doesn't feel shit, doesn't regret anything. And then he still was sticking around the group because it's music and he loves music. And the particular piece of music that we were using for this gentleman was Shed So Many Tears by Tupac, but we also used Trauma by Meek Mill. And it's just it's a very good way of we listen to the song, and so people are kind of in a more meditative state because of the rhythmic qualities, but there's also lyrical content that starts to stick out. And we often will ask the question, so what lyrics stood out to you? And what's so amazing with the Tupac song specifically, there's a line in there which is there a place in heaven for a G? So is there an afterlife for somebody who's a gangster? And it is, I'm not even joking, I've now done this song in hundreds of sessions, and that line always gets brought up in the first or second response by people who don't care about anything, supposedly. And so just to kind of summarize my points, I don't overtalk, which I can very easily do, it's almost, we've found that music is a very effective way to almost, like, they've got this hardened trauma wall, and you can almost create a liquid sense of empathy to build, to break down the sand of the wall and eventually get through to the damaged child. The trauma is when you're stuck, and it's almost a way to start to actually talk about the emotional content that they otherwise will not reflect upon. Just to summarize, the song Trauma by Meek Mill is actually one of the greatest, I'm trying not to swear, I cuss all the time. It's one of the greatest experiences of a very much on-the-ground grassroots perspective of having PTSD and going through prison. Like, even the chorus of the song is so related to the Chris Wilson experience, but it's when the drugs got a hold of your mama, bullet holes in the locker. So it's pretty wild stuff. But music, it works.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it makes me really curious also just to know from a like neurological perspective with children, where are their brains at in terms of development, in terms of actual like neurophysiology, and then with music or with other modalities that are pivotal to helping the development of other aspects of the brain, that I'd be so fascinated to be able to know, okay, these are tools that we can really help in that important time of a child's development. Karen.
Oh, thank you. How I work with children, I used to be a school therapist as well, and done a lot of community mental health work, is I usually draw circles to represent systems, because PTSD is so complex, right? You have to really break it down. So I do these overlapping circles to show them the different ways trauma can impact a person. So one circle would be the mental health. One circle is the body. One circle is spirituality. One circle is relational. And then, emotions are kind of in the middle. And then I give them examples. So if your mom or dad hears a car backfire, or a firework, they might get startled. This is what's going on inside their body, or this is what the behavior looks like. And then after I describe those, in an age appropriate way, each system that's impacted by trauma, because we in the field know that trauma impacts every single part of a person's life, everything, right? Even spiritual survivors question, they have moral injury, especially my combat vets I used to work with. If there was a God, why would this happen? So there's a lot of work in all these areas. If adults have a hard time understanding, I'm still learning every day about PTSD. A child it's going to be, an adventure. So drawings, and then asking them for examples of what they're seeing, and trying to show them that this isn't their fault. That's the approach I usually take with kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, especially that last point, the way I think that a lot of people in trauma and have experienced trauma coming to realize that there's always an inner part that has taken fault and taken self-blame and holding that guilt, and how that is a major piece to look at and dissemble in trauma healing. I remember that being a really surprising and big part of my own healing. So I love that you call that out. Nadia.
Thank you for this question. I know it's been a difficult path to get to where I am, and helping my children understand the effects that trauma and adult, let alone the childhood PTSD had on me. I think from a larger perspective, and what the Trauma Research Foundation and everybody's work here is doing is, giving a voice, first of all, so that eventually places like addiction treatment centers can not only offer, the dual services of addiction, which is so interrelated and tied into many people's stories that have had trauma, including his mother, but to add trauma therapy, particularly when there's court imposed treatment, which we have had movement in the court system with the drug courts, but increase access to trauma therapy while in addiction treatment. And also, most of all, don't re-traumatize the children by forced separation. Allow the mother and the child far more access to go and get help in those settings. There's literally only 2 centers in the entire nation that allow mothers to go with their children to get addiction treatment, the vast majority of which have had trauma, all of them. And I mean, I know in my own story, when I was in jail, all of the mothers, all of them had either addiction and or were desperately trying to leave an abusive situation and wanted help, wanted a way out. And the first message to them always was, you have to get sober. You have to stay sober to, obtain a healthy and safe home. So I just wanted to put that out there. But also not, the system not punishing the vulnerability. So when a mother is spiraling, not pointing at that behavior as a sign of look, they're out of control, unless Ms. Walker pointed out the shame, which is such a whole wider subject that we can speak of. you can't deal with your own personal shaming if there's the public that is shaming and branding. And so allowing these safe places through the resources that are there now, like the treatment centers, through the drug courts, for trauma therapy, and for children to go with their moms where they've been there, can learn the language of identifying feelings and breath work to ground oneself. And then now that I'm doing in my life today for many years is doing those things with my children, so that that full circle can happen where there's actually a gift to give to children through the trauma that you have gone through, to teach them, that they can live their life differently. They can have the tools to say, what is happening right now? Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath, and my kids will shoot, their dart guns at the feeling charts, and the thing will stick on whatever feeling that they're having instead of going into a tantrum, So that's the big picture perspective that I have for mothers that have children that are trying to get better.
Yeah, thank you for that. It makes me think about later in the book as Chris was developing his master plan. I forget what he would call his thinking, and I'm mixing it up because on our team, sometimes we use the phrase magical thinking. But there was something that Chris always said about this was his type of thinking, having the dreams and the positive delusions. Thank you, Bill. That he had these positive delusions, but even if they were positive delusions, the power of anchoring into these dreams was so continued from him. I'm excited for our Q&A to really, I'm so curious to know in those moments, what was it that allowed him to really sink into this possible reality that he was working towards. So let's go ahead and share some from the virtual audience. I think the name from Jess saying, knowledge is power. So being transparent at age appropriate levels is very important to discussing mental health challenges. And then speaking on mental health, having good mental health is key to the healthy development and well-being of every child. Kids need good mental health, not only to be able to deal with challenges and adapt to change, but so they can feel good about themselves, build healthy relationships with others, and enjoy life. Yeah, thank you about that, Jess. And Mitch says, thank you for addressing moral injury. I will provide you with a research article by someone I have great respect for. So thank you, Mitch. Okay, so on to our next question. This has also just been really great. The discussion has been so rich. So thank you all panelists for being so present and sharing. Frederick?
Yes. So this question, it's really focusing on what will you do? And so if you were to encounter a youth in a similar situation as Chris was, what steps could you take to intervene and help them? If you were to encounter a youth in a similar situation as Chris was, what steps could you take to intervene and help them or him or whatever? What would you do? And we really want you to think about the practical, because many people encounter this situation, and always the question, what can be done that's healthy and responsive and not reactive? I see Sabrina. Sabrina, you're on mute.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
The piece that I always go toward is to find someone that represents that person's community that can actually help them long term. So I wouldn't see myself as the resource. I would see myself as the person that connects Chris or the child to a resource in their community that can go along with them with longevity. Because like Chris's experience, that young man that was also the lifer, that person was in his community, was representing him, and he could form an attachment to that person and go forward with that person, with that direction. So I think that that's the piece that would be most important to me. And finding that person may take some time, and certainly it would be up to Chris or the child who they felt most comfortable with. But someone that represents, that looks like them and is living in that environment, that is succeeding and would commit to forming a relationship with the child or Chris to help them move forward. That continuity and that secure attachment, and that the child can see hope and possibility. And I think the most detrimental factor that I hear in the story so far in the first and second component is Chris's mom continually rebuffs him and then rejects him and then criticizes him. And I think that that's the piece has been most potent to me. And so finding that attachment figure that he can relate to, see and relate to.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is that you become a bridge. So you help support him by finding someone to take him to that next place. But your goal is to create the bridge. And what's helpful around that is that we all have different spaces of agency in different roles. I know for me, as I worked with kids as a therapist and a school administrator, there's some kids I was just present with them. And some kids, I remember a few kids who would be so hostile. And I thought after a year and a half, they're trying to break me. But I learned that being consistent and being the same, positive and supportive, after a while, they realize you're actually legitimate. You are sincere. And then our life changed and the work started to happen. And so I hear you saying sometimes you're a bridge, other times you can have other roles. I see that Amanda has her hand up. Please join in.
Neglect is the most prevalent form of abuse. And I think for me, especially as a child, I just felt very invisible and not believed. And so, to bring humanity to youth and to see them, as humans who are often engaged in very adult behaviors and scenarios that are just driving them out of their body and mind. To be seen as a child, I think, is just the most positive, life-altering experience. But more importantly, is to believe the children and youth when they tell us what they're going through, to get on their level. It's something I still do with my kids is, sit on the floor or lay in the bed with them and just bring this humanity of relaxation and give them the floor. And sometimes it just means being quiet until they find the courage to speak. And other times it just means kind of like this banter about nothing until they finally come back into their nervous system enough to speak that truth. And then I feel like it's our job as adults to then believe them. And it makes such a huge difference.
I think that's being fully present and believing the child to be there for them, to create that safety in presence and also recognition what they're going through. Thank you. Lisa, you're next.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
So this has been an absolutely awesome discussion. I could talk on every single point that has been raised. And as someone who works with child sexual abuse on a regular basis, work with sex trafficking on a regular basis, so I see these scenarios played out continuously. Specifically for the last point, my first question was, well, it depends on where Chris was. You know, what if I saw somebody who was in a position like Chris? Are we talking about a 7-year-old Chris? Are we talking about a 12-year-old Chris? Are we talking about a 14-year-old Chris? Because that makes a difference on what type of interaction I'll have with the person, and what we'll do from there. So everything has to be age appropriate. And but I'm a believer that we have to also be realistic. There are some situations that are not going to change. They're not going to change overnight. They're not going to change in the next 30 days, so there's so many different perspectives on that. And I really appreciate what everyone else has said because I'm in total agreement. There's something about knowing that I have a safe place to vent. Maybe that's all we can do for a child. Be present, like you said, Frederick. Maybe I could be the person that can take the child to the library every now and then. Maybe I can be the person to be an outlet for the parent. So because we're talking about an entire person, I think someone mentioned a human being. There's so many different avenues that we can approach, but what we should not do is what Amanda said and let the child believe that they're invisible. So I just I'm gonna land right there.
And it is so true in terms of there are different ways that we engage. But the most importantly, I think everyone is in agreement that there has to be some type of engagement, directly or indirectly, because ignoring the challenge can exasperate greater challenges, not only for this child, but the larger community and people all around them. And that is an impact on society. And we, in human nature, we are people, and important. How do we find ways to build bridges and support people in moments of struggle and challenge, and moments of opportunities? I know we are close to time, so Teresa and I want to hear. We want to hear everyone. So we have a few more questions, but we really want to bring in more voices. So I'm gonna turn it over to Teresa. Thank you for your contribution. And wow, this is exciting. We're just getting started, everybody. We're just getting started. So
Yeah, great first week to kick off. So to share some voices from the virtual space that Stephanie has been tuning in with and pulling over some comments for us. So some discourse between Kaita and Pearl. Kaita shares, traditional therapy, psychosocial education, and trauma-informed practices do not have the reach to address soul wounds, intergenerational/historical trauma, beliefs ingrained in the Black psyche. And Pearl responded, I agree, Kaita. As much as we do to intervene, it seems more like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound that rarely, if ever, addresses the intergenerational, historical, and systemic structures. Yeah, thank you both so much for naming those two really important aspects. And it's difficult to talk. There's so much there, and having that entire conversation would be great to dig into with everyone. Just on that topic, we could spend hours. With that, we have 2 more questions for us in the next 20 minutes. So question number 6 is, how may have Chris's previous traumatic experience influence the actions he took on the night of the murder? So how may have Chris's previous traumatic experience influence the actions he took on the night of the murder? And perhaps, with the share that we just heard, if people want to also take the space to speak into, how does intergenerational trauma, how may have that experience influence the actions he took on the night of the murder? Any thoughts? How's that landing with everyone? Or even any thoughts on what brings this pause? What is this contemplation? How is it landing that really brings us to pause? Bill, love to hear from you.
by the point we get to his description of what happened that night, I feel like we have been through so much in the stories that he tells about the experiences that he's been having, from the time things started to seem to go south, like right around age 9, right? The helplessness that he feels after not being able to protect his mother really, really stands out to me. And then, the kidnapping that he's experienced, and I forget exactly how immediate that was to the night. But you just have this visceral sense of a numb anger and a complete disconnect from relationship at that point. And, I often talk about, it's like there's a blind rage. There's a moment of blind rage when your nervous system, your amygdala just takes over and your body is reacting and you are not thinking, to the point of you're not even processing visual information at all. And, it's this cumulative effect of the repeated traumas and the repeated failure of everyone and every system around him to help him come to deal with that and to release that and discharge that energy, that it just explodes in that moment. And this is why, I think it is so absolutely crucial, and something that we emphasize in the programming that we offer, that, a lot of people think of yoga as relaxation, but you don't relax until you discharge the energy that you're carrying with you. And so this is where it begins. And this is what we see, with just this rage that's pent up and releases violently in that moment. And so I was really feeling it. And I'll tell you, I've been feeling it throughout this whole conversation. This has been I'm feeling some of the vicarious trauma through all this discussion. So I hope everybody does a little bit of movement when we're done with this to help them release that and do a little bit of breathing as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That's really powerful. And maybe just while we move on to the next share, we can just make sure we take a stretch and be attuned to our bodies and be in our hearts and, take that moment to really acknowledge the impact of what trauma and vicarious trauma can really play on our system. So because we are running a little low on our next questions, we'll just take one more share and then move on to the next one. Karen, it'd be lovely to hear from you. You are muted, Karen.
Oh, and I said such incredible things. I'm going to be brief. I agreed with everything that Bill stated. He did an eloquent job of making those points. I think what's really important to remember is that this teenager, his adrenaline and cortisol was running through his body all day, every day. He never felt safe. He was always on guard. He had no one to protect him. So I think that hyperarousal trauma response had a lot to do with this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And we'll share some of the comments from our virtual audience. Dion says, spiritual trauma is real and newly emerging as a field of study. I can imagine that Chris suffered on that level as well. Thank you for sharing that. And Mitch shared, unintentional neglect has some of the worst outcomes from a public health perspective. Yes, definitely. Okay, well, we'll have maybe 2 more shares for this next question. Frederick?
Yeah, and I just as a follow a connection, I just realized it's so critical to recognize the impact of a pressure cooker impact on a person in terms of when there's so many barriers and challenges pressing against someone, what happens? And I think this book really captures significant ways that people can be impacted. And I know there are other ways as well. So the question I have is, why is social support following a traumatic experience so crucial? Why is social support following a traumatic experience so crucial? Why do we need this social support? What does it do for us? And what happens when we don't have it? But that's not the question, but why is it important? So I'm curious, what do you think? Why do we need it? As you're thinking, I wanted you to experiencing a traumatic experience. I know from my experience myself, it can be so destabilizing. And having another person there who's not destabilized, who's able to guide in an experience can be so helpful. When you hear of a sudden death of someone you love, or being in a car accident, you might think, "Oh, I'm fine. I can get up. I can do this." You're not in your right mind. So why is social support is helpful? If anyone would love to jump in. Dr. Walker.
Yes, I hate that time is escaping us. This has been absolutely amazing. One of the things that I automatically thought of was it grounds you. It's almost that I'm okay, you're okay, that you can get through this. And oftentimes in treating children and adults since 2009, 100% trauma, that is one of the biggest things is who got to you first. And typically, if the person that gets to the individual that has been impacted, if that person is able to say, "You're okay," if their response is, "It's not your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, we're going to help you," I have found that the inclination to move forward is a lot more impactful, is a lot more positive than if someone comes in and, "Why did you let him touch you? You're just grown, you're fast," just in just common terms. They were flirting, that 5-year-old was flirting with that 40-year-old man. It has a different lasting effect if that initial individual has a positive response to, "We're going to do what's necessary. We're going to call the authorities. We're taking you to get your forensic interview. We're taking you to get your child medical examination. You're following through with treatment, no matter what," in comparison to, "We're just going to sweep it under the rug and act like nothing happened." So that's my take on that real quick, because I know we're running out of time, but being able to be grounded gives a sense that I can move beyond what just happened to me.
Yes, it is so true. The power of the individual has a difference, and it depends, just like an emotional contagion. It can be a positive impact that can be caught and taken inside, or it can be negative, and it can create even more damaging impact. So how do you frame what has happened to someone in a way that they can bounce forward and heal and grow? I know Teresa said 2 people. However, I'm also looking at the time. So I just want to do a quick time check. I do see a few hands, but Teresa, how are we doing?
Yeah, let's take one more share.
Okay. Sabrina, I know I saw your hand, but I just wanted to get James in, not because we haven't heard his voice, if it's okay. James, jump in here.
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding and what I've experienced around people who've experienced significant trauma is a disconnect. It's a disconnect from self, one becomes lost in the traumatic event. It's a disconnect from others, and it's really a disconnect from reality. And so, I wanted to bring in the reality of people who live in incarcerated environments, because typically they come from past trauma, they come from past traumatic events, and then they end up incarcerated. And so this contributes to compound trauma and what we call incarceration syndrome. And they're actually living in a situation that is trauma on simmer. And so a lot of the issues that have been talked about, Dr. Walker talked about shame. Shame is such a general commodity among people who are incarcerated. And so what we experience, even when they come to a yoga program, is they're withdrawn. And one of the first things, beyond yoga, what is so important for us is to establish a relationship of trust, to establish a relationship, and that relationship be based on trust. And then being able to provide the healing benefits, the potential healing benefits of a yoga or an embodiment practice, as Bill mentioned, to begin to discharge the trauma that's been held in the body for years, not to mention just the top level of trauma that they're experiencing as a result of being incarcerated. So it's a gradual process of peeling back the layers, and it's all done through this relationship of trust that's established. And so whoever that person is, right, that we're talking about, whoever can establish that bridge of trust, and then perhaps establish some kind of healing service, be it music, be it therapy, be it play, be it, a lot of the talk we were talking about children, play is so important as a way of contacting a child and being able to perhaps begin to discharge some of those symptoms of trauma.
Wow, thank you. Well said. We have had such a wonderful conversation, and I thank you for your responses. I apologize for all the people who were not able to share in this last question. Teresa, I'm going to turn it over to you, but this is exciting, and we've just started. We have 3 more weeks to really engage. So this has been so wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to take just a minute or two, Frederick and myself, if you wanted to share any closing reflection. We can both take the time just to do that, and then I'll share a little bit about what's coming up.
I think what I hear in all of our discussions is that we have possibilities to engage. Some of us will be mirrors for people. They can see themselves. Some of us will be bridges. We will help them get from one place to the next place. And some of us will be advocates in ways in which, indirectly or indirectly. And so there's multiple entry points. And what also I've heard, this is highly complex, but we always have to see the humanity in each individual, the people who've been impacted and those who have exhibited the impact of trauma. The humanity is so critical, I've heard in all these conversations. And this is so good. I want to tell you, this has been such a great, this reminds me of a potluck. I feel like everyone brought a dish, and it was a delicious dish, not the dish that you left untapped, but this has been a great, fulfilling conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Frederick, for coming in and just being with us through so much. I really can't express enough gratitude, I think, for people like you all who join us as a part of community and build relationship with us as an organization and build trust, as we said. And It's a really great, so just a really great way to really see how, at least learn how can an organization and a community and individuals and all of its greater reach embody the work that everyone brings forward and the knowledge and experience. And so thank you so much. And yeah, I think gosh, my reflection is just I feel so moved. There have been so many times where I've had to fight back tears, and the Chris's story, I'm really excited to just be hearing from everyone what are those important aspects that stood out to them, and how is it that then each of us in the work that we do goes forward to embody and integrate that. And then also, on the bigger level, how can we go from learning from a story of an individual to building it into programs and systems and practices, and then how can our learnings from those programs and systems and practices be continually built even bigger into system changes and into legislation, because we have so many entryway points, as you said, and then how can we come together as an entire industry and a field and just a population, a community, to bubble that up and turn that into something that gets that becomes more scalable and then filters back down to all the individuals. So I'm excited for all those conversations and learnings with you all. So it brings us to a close. Thank you so much for joining in our season 3, episode 1. It does feel like these little shows that we're on, and for being a part of our community. Thank you so much to the panelists for taking your time and sharing so openly. It can be, such a really open and vulnerable space. So we really see and acknowledge that. Thank you so much to the TRF team. I wish you all could see the behind the scenes, but it takes an entire team to produce this. So just acknowledging all of the work of a really small yet mighty team. So I hope you all get the chance to get to know each and every one of them. And Prison Yoga Project, thank you both so much for being here. I want to give you all a chance to share that we will be hosting a event with them on Friday, September 16th from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific. And it's going to be a workshop and discussion group led by Bill Brown, the executive director. Bill, would you like to just take a minute or so and let us know what this event is about?
Yeah, sure. We want to talk about incarceration and trauma, and like what James was mentioning, what we're really experiencing when we're working in prisons and jails is trauma and simmer. And so we're going to pull from a workshop that we do as part of our foundational training, and I like to call it like world's least comfortable guided meditation, because we're going to drop into an embodied experience of what it's like to be incarcerated. And then we'll do a bit of a yoga practice that's get some energy out, and just notice the way our bodies feel and from one state to the other, because I think there's nothing more that drives home the necessity of working with the body than actually really feeling that. And to be able to start to imagine what the experience of incarceration is from a visceral level, I think is really important for us. So yeah, please join us, and look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, so thank you all. Just some notes from the Trauma Research Foundation. We're led by 2 really amazing fearless leaders, Bessel van der Kolk, if you don't know him, the author of The Body Keeps a Score, and Leisha Skye, also just an amazing nonprofit leader and a great somatic. She leads great somatic experiences as well. So big thanks to them for leading our team. Things that you can look forward to coming up from us is we will be having our first ever annual play conference that will be October 28th through the 30th, I believe. And we'll also be having our annual film festival coming up. That's going to be our 3rd film festival. We'll be screening 6 different films, and we will be having an audience choice award where the winner of that film, the film directors will be able to choose an organization of their choice to have the award go to. And then also, just to put on your calendar, in January, our Social Justice Summit, which will be another 3 days of some really phenomenal speakers and discussions. So just visit the website. We have a number of different programs to offer and look forward to continually inviting you back. Please also feel free to share all sorts of feedback that you have with us. We're very open and welcoming and love to hear what you have to say. So until then, we will see you for episode 2 next week, same time, same place. Thank you all so much.